Good night, and thank you for joining me on another edition of In Touch. I'm your host, Jadia Japierre Emmanuel. Tonight, we'll be focusing on pronouncements made in the 2015-2016 budget address by our Prime Minister, Honorable Dr. Kennedy Anthony. A lot has been said, a lot has been proposed, but we will be focusing tonight on some of the tax reform measures that the Prime Minister announced. I'm very pleased that we have in studio with us the Comptroller of the Inland Revenue Department, Mrs. Sophia Henry, and she will take us through some of the proposals in the budget statement. We'll examine what currently exists, what are the challenges that are currently being experienced by the Inland Revenue Department, so that you can get a better appreciation of why the reforms are necessary at this time and what we expect the outcome or the changes to be as a result of these proposals. And so, with absolutely no delay, I would introduce and welcome to the show Mrs. Henry. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. And it is always a pleasure to learn because when I do the shows, well, it is an opportunity for me to learn from those who come so that we can pass on and bring in the viewers and the listeners so that they too would understand the changes that are happening and they too would be informed to understand what the next step would be and how it would impact them as citizens. So thank you so much for agreeing to be here tonight.
Thank you, Jadia, for the invitation, and good night, viewers. It's my privilege to be here, and I thank you for this opportunity that I can discuss the proposed changes. As the Comptroller of the Department, it is my responsibility to ensure that I educate the taxpayers and I clarify all matters relevant to tax issues.
I think you will not be surprised if I start on the issue of VAT, because this has been the most talked about tax regime, and I believe that because it is a new proposal, because we are basically still in the adjustment period, both the businesses and the consumer as well, many persons are asking a lot of questions, and some of us are still trying to find our way around the value-added tax. And the Prime Minister, when the value-added tax was introduced to replace a whole host of other taxes, the Prime Minister did indicate that the act was not perfect, that we will be seeking to make adjustments as we go along the way, that we would be engaging those involved, the businesses and so on, so that we can make the changes as we go along to get closer to what would be the desired system. We have seen some changes, and there is also, there are at least about 3 proposals in the budget that would be affecting the value-added tax regime. And so I want to start off on the point of the very first point that the Prime Minister made when he spoke about VAT, and that was the increase in the threshold from $180,000 to $400,000. Now, you know, once you're speaking about taxes, it does not matter what the proposal is. Once somewhere in that sentence there is the word increase, people become very edgy and people begin to ask questions. And sometimes based on the questions and the points that are being put forward, you can clearly see that there is not an understanding as to what the language means, not an understanding as to what the impact of the proposal will be. So can you tell us a little bit about the threshold? What exactly does it mean? And why are we making the change or increasing from $180,000 to $400,000 at this time?
Okay. To be registered for VAT, a person must make taxable supplies of at least $180,000. Okay, we have exempt, we have zero-rated supplies, and we have taxable. Once you make a supply and it's not exempt, then it is taxable if it is not stated as a zero-rated supply. The current threshold is $180,000. So anyone who requires registration or a taxpayer, a person must register once your supply is $180,000 or more. Now, there is also voluntary registration, okay? And someone could earn below the $180,000, the taxable supplies could be below 180, and that person can apply for voluntary registration. And there's provision for that now, and even with the change. Now, even with the threshold of $180,000, quite a few VAT registrants have requested deregistration. they do not want to be registered for VAT, but we had no choice. They had to remain registered because they meet the threshold. So we have done some review. We have analyzed our VAT registrants, and we realized that quite a few of them are struggling to maintain adequate records. And VAT, the VAT, administration of VAT is premised on proper accounting system. You must have proper accounting system, proper controls. You must operate from a fixed place of abode or business. So quite a few of them find it burdensome to meet the requirements. So they have requested the registration. So we have considered that. We have extensive dialogue with the taxpayers. I know the VAT office, they are out there. They discuss with the taxpayers, and based on some of the discussions and the in-house analysis, we have made the recommendation for an increase in the threshold to the 400,000. Now, increasing the 400,000 doesn't mean that, increasing the threshold to 400,000 does not mean that everyone falling below that threshold will be deregistered automatically.
Okay.
That is not the case. I know that's the fear, but that's not the case. Okay, we have quite a few of our businesses, our manufacturers, etc. We will not just deregister. As a matter of fact, we are already considering going out, and we want to speak to every single registrant falling below that 400,000 threshold. Those who require deregistration, we will explain to them the implications, and if they insist, we will deregister them, but we will not automatically deregister once the law takes effect. Okay? Even with the threshold of 400,000, persons requiring registration, they would just need to meet a few conditions. The criteria, they would have to ensure, again, they have proper accounting records, and we are adding an additional criterion. They would need to ensure that they adhere to all the acts administered by the department. So we have a few VAT registrants, they're probably not compliant. We will work with them. We will not automatically deregister them because they do not meet the criteria in full, but we will work with them. We'll give them some time so that they could come up to scratch. But I want to assure the general public that it's not a case whereby we will just go deregister in entities. We will work with the entities. So no one will be disadvantaged.
Many persons have understood the impact on the small businesses, but are asking, are there any consequences or will there be any impact on the general public? Because when we speak about the threshold, the question which was asked is that whether we are talking about businesses who pay VAT based on what they produce, or are we talking about businesses that would have been required to collect VAT from the consumer based on products that they sell to the individual consumers who would interact with their businesses. So many persons seem to understand what happens on the business end and the interaction between the Inland Revenue Department or the VAT office and that business, but they're trying to find, where do I fit in this proposal? Would it have any impact on the consumer who would be interacting with that business? No.
Well, you register for VAT if you are going to charge a VAT. So someone who pays VAT is not necessarily a VAT registrant, okay? But if you meet the threshold, that means you need to charge VAT and collect VAT on behalf of the government. So that is what is required for registration. Now, once you are VAT registered and all your input VAT, you will be able to claim that, okay? Now, if you are deregistered, then you will still pay VAT once you purchase from someone who is registered, okay? Now, what happens from that point is beyond us, okay? It depends on the good that is supplied, and it depends on market forces. So if, for example, you're not registered for VAT, and you purchase items and you pay VAT and you cannot claim it as input VAT, what happens there? The department has no control over that. And as I indicated earlier, it all depends on market forces. So you can choose to absorb that or pass it on to the consumer, dependent on the industry that you're in and how competitive it is. Okay, but I don't think anybody will be seriously disadvantaged because we have businesses currently that are not registered, and they are operating and they are okay.
Indeed. Another matter coming to the fore related to the VAT is the whole issue of the treatment basically of zero-rated items. Now, I noted that the Prime Minister in his budget statement made reference to zero-rated businesses and indicating that as part of the reform, the proposal put forward automatic refunds for zero-rated businesses. What currently exists? How does it work? Because I've heard the complaints, and I think even in the Prime Minister's last budget statement, he spoke about complaints from the business sector, and he made some changes to the VAT, to the basket of goods, based on the complaints that were being received and because of how tedious and costly the process was. He kept saying that there were complaints that there were too many items on that zero-rated list, and as a result,
exempt, too many on the exempt list.
Yes, and as a result, it posed a challenge to them. What exactly exists now? And I want you to take us into what has caused the proposal and what we expect to see coming out of that proposal.
Okay. Schedule 1 of the Act would highlight all the items that are zero-rated. Mm-hmm. For example, electricity supplied by Lucilec, the Act is specific. Water supplied by Wasco, eggs, pasta, all of these, the supply of fuel. Mm-hmm. So these are zero-rated items. Now, we have also the duty-free shops, okay? Exporters. Once you export, an export is zero-rated. So anyone who, or any person who supplies zero-rated items. So a zero-rated supply is a taxable supply, first of all. It's a taxable supply. Okay. Although the tax rate is 0%, okay, it is a taxable supply. Now, once your zero-rated supply is 50% or more of your taxable supply, you are entitled to claim your refund within a month of submitting the return. So for example, a VAT return for the month of May is due on the 21st of June. Okay. Okay? And anyone with zero-rated supplies, 50% or more of the taxable supplies, can actually make a claim for that refund the following month, which is July. But according to the Act, an application must be made for that refund. Oh. And what you find, zero-rated businesses, almost every month they're entitled to a refund. And some of them were complaining, and that's what I keep on saying to taxpayers. We are there. If there's an issue, we would like them to come in and discuss it. We will discuss, we will look at the provisions, and we'll see to what extent we can propose amendments to make the administration of the VAT easier. So many of them have come to us. It doesn't make sense every month they're entitled to the refund and they have to apply. So we were able to support such a request for an minister's budget address. The proposal is to remove that request for that refund that's due anyway. So the department will pay the refund automatically to entities that qualify.
Indeed. We're due for our first commercial break. A very interesting and informative discussion, I must say. Stay in touch with us. When we come back, we'll continue to discuss some of the proposals contained in the 2015-2016 budget statement, specifically to the issue of our taxes. We'll be looking at VAT as well as the personal income tax reform as well. Stay in touch. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to In Touch. I'm your host, J.D. Emmanuel, and my guest this evening is Mrs. Sophia Henry, and she is the Comptroller of the Inland Revenue Department. We've been discussing value-added tax and the proposals made in the budget, the 2015-2016 budget, to deal with some of the issues that we continue to hear complaints about, and some of the issues I believe that the Inland Revenue Department would have reviewed over the last 2 years or so to make the process a bit simpler and to ensure that we have a process that is not tedious or too costly,
Correct.
neither to the department or to the taxpayer as well. You spoke about interactions between the Inland Revenue Department and the taxpayer as you went along explaining some of the issues that came about. I must ask, what form of assistance is given to the taxpayer or the registrant by the value added tax office or the Inland Revenue Department? What sort of interface do we usually have? Do you wait for them to come in with complaints, or do we have a system where you would seek out two-way kind of communication between the department and the VAT registrant?
Okay, it's mixed. Sometimes they would write us, they would request a meeting to discuss an issue. But we do quite a few advisory visits also. So quite a few of our auditors, our VAT auditors would go out there, would review their system, would advise them on issues, or they would call to ask about the implications of certain issues beforehand. So it's a mix. They would call, we would visit, we would write to say we want to come in, etc.
Indeed. Now, the Prime Minister spoke about a deferred tax system for the importation of capital goods. And a lot of the proposals in the budget to deal with tax reform seem to have centered around the VAT. The Prime Minister did indicate when he spoke about the adjustments to the personal income tax that it had become necessary because the government of St. Lucia was looking more in the way of indirect taxes, as is happening all over the world,
yes,
as opposed to focusing so heavily on the personal income tax. And so this is why we're seeing a break on that end as well. But he spoke about adjustments to that system for your deferred tax payment on importation of capital goods. Where exactly was the issue there? Did it lie mainly with our manufacturers, and what are the proposals and the impact of the proposals for that specific system? Okay.
Yes, the manufacturers, they came to us. We've had several meetings with them, and they have often expressed that it's very costly. For example, if they need to import a capital item and they need a loan, they would need to source the 15% to pay the VAT also. Now, that is a cash flow issue for them. And quite a few VAT registrants have come to us with that complaint that it's increasing the cost of capital. Okay. Now, there's currently a provision for the capital goods to be exempt upon importation, but the business, for example, the entity should not have commenced operation. That's the only way you can qualify. So it's a problem for those that have already commenced operation. So we have listened and we reviewed, we researched the country closest in terms of giving relief on the importation of capital goods within the region, that's Barbados. But there were some differences in their system and our system. So we did some internal research and we proposed this system, and it will benefit the importer. It's applicable to all sectors. All sectors, everybody will benefit, but it's only on select capital goods. And the reason I say select capital goods, if, for example, currently the importer would be able to claim the input tax on that capital item, then that would qualify. But if it is a capital item, if imported now, there's no input tax claimable, then that would not qualify. So we need to make that clear. And it's not automatic. Whoever is importing that capital good must make an application. So they must visit the VAT office. We must be aware, we must approve prior to that item coming into the country. Now, once the good reaches the port and approval is granted, then the importer is able to clear the goods without the payment of any VAT. And we will take care of the accounting. We're still fine-tuning that. But as I said, it's on select goods, and the importer should be able to claim that input tax on that particular good for it to be approved.
Will it be select goods in select quantities or just select goods?
No, not select. Let me give you an example. Currently, if a business has a passenger vehicle, okay, input VAT is not claimable on that.
Okay.
Now, I'm not referring to a tour company and that's the business, no. So you have any other business, maybe let's say a manufacturer,
Okay.
and that manufacturer has a passenger vehicle. That does not qualify for input VAT. So in a case, that's why it's select, not in terms of quantity, but whether the good qualifies for that person to claim the input tax on it.
Okay, and there is another matter related to the value-added tax, and that is the unconditional gift.
Well, that's just to the state.
Okay.
Currently, there's a provision that if there's an unconditional gift to the state, the supply of a good, then that is exempt. So we just extended it to include services also.
Okay.
But that's only to the states.
Okay, so it would not be to like charitable organizations.
No, that
so
is already covered in the VAT Act.
Okay, and because I was just getting that question on my WhatsApp a little earlier because someone needed to clarify whether if someone is would be sending items down to St. Lucia from abroad and it is being gifted as opposed to you paying for it, whether that would apply
There's
to the
certain
individual
conditions.
as well.
There's certain conditions, but that is already covered in the VAT Act. But the one being proposed is just for the state, supply of services to the state.
I wanted to ask you on the whole issue of the importation of the capital goods. When we say deferred, it means that at some point later on we would expect there to be some kind of interaction and payment. Am I understanding it correctly, or are we writing it off completely?
Let me give you an example. You may have a manufacturer, I'm using a manufacturer for example. That manufacturer imports a capital item, and that manufacturer is able to claim all the input tax on that item. So it's just a matter of payment and then claiming the amount.
Okay.
It goes in and out.
Okay.
Okay? So it's no loss of revenue for the government, but it will facilitate the whole process for the importer in terms of cash flow, getting that upfront cash as opposed to, you know, getting it in the form of a refund. So you pay it upfront and you still get it back. Okay. So that's what is meant by deferred. So it will just be offset. The final accounting will still finalize in that. But in essence, it will be offset against probably whatever output tax is collected on behalf of the government.
Okay, I have someone who needs us to go back to the whole issue of the threshold to clarify a matter. And I would read the question so that our response would be able to speak directly to her. She says, on the issue of the increase in the threshold, there is a matter that I'm still not able to understand. I heard the Comptroller indicated that the deregistration will not be automatic, that you would have to go into the Inland Revenue Department or to request deregistration. The way it is now, once someone is displaying that value-added tax certificate, whoever they're interacting with must pay, so they will charge. How are we to say, for example, that this person would request deregistration, would not be authorized to collect the VAT, and at the same time would be interacting with the customer and collecting that tax from them under a false banner? What will they do to address that situation, because it may very well happen? Okay.
As I indicated earlier, we will visit every VAT registrant falling below that threshold, and we will not wait the time the law takes effect. We will commence almost immediately. We want to do that before the law takes effect, to visit every VAT registrant to find out what is the position. Do they require, would they want to remain registered? So I don't want whoever posed the question to think that when the law takes effect that persons requiring deregistration may still have their VAT certificate. No. We will visit prior to the law taking effect, and if anyone has to be deregistered, we will collect the certificates.
I need to ask a question on the registrants. Do you have a publication or a list of businesses that are qualified or meet the threshold and who would be collecting VAT on behalf of the state? Or should we simply look for, I know that the advisories from the Inland Revenue Department always say to us, the consumers, that you must look for that certificate, because this is what says to you that this person is authorized to collect the VAT. But do we have any list a full list, for example, of those who are registered so that the public may choose to access that list and want to know whether this business is qualified, or whether if I go to this business and they're charging me VAT, whether it is the right or the wrong thing to do, and then I can know how to proceed thereafter.
Yes, we do have a list. We have a complete list. You could go to the VAT website. You could also go to our website, www.gov.lc, and you'll get a link to the VAT website, and you will see that complete list. And if you're not sure, you could also call the department, but that list is available online.
Indeed. Another question on the whole issue of the VAT, and this person asks, I noted that we made changes to the threshold, and this was what was announced in the budget statement. However, I've been hearing in the watering holes that there are some items as well that would be affected as a result of that. Can the Comptroller specify whether it is simply businesses or whether we are speaking also about specific items?
Once you talk about threshold, it's applicable to a business, a VAT registrant, okay? And that threshold is based on a taxable supply, whether it be of goods or services, okay? But the threshold is applicable to a registrant, a VAT registrant.
Indeed. Okay. I hope this clarifies it. And I know that if you could just hold your questions for just a little bit. I know that some of you are trying to engage me even while we are in the discussion. But as always, we will have, closer to the end of the program, we'll allow you to call in with your questions or to also send in your messages. I know that some of you are trying to understand as we go along and you want to address it immediately so that you can ask your follow-up questions. But rest assured, we will, and if you allow us to engage in the discussion, we'll have enough time at the end of the take your calls and your questions. We'll go for our second commercial break. When we come back, we will be discussing the whole issue of the personal income tax reform. Stay in touch. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Touch. We'll now be discussing the whole issue of the personal income tax reform. And I know that most times when people hear the word reform, they say, my goodness, we say that all the time. We have been speaking about this for so long, and we have made changes hoping to get a desired outcome. But sometimes we remain the very same place with the very same challenges that we seek to address in the first place. But what I see proposed in the 2015-2016 budget, I can classify them as extensive because we're addressing not just one aspect but several aspects related to the personal income tax. Firstly, there's an increase in the personal allowance, proposed to increase from 18,000 to 21,000.
25,000.
25,000, yes, which is a large jump. Because I think the initial proposal was 21,000, which is what Prime Minister spoke about last year, and now we are seeking to move to 25,000. And so this would basically knock out a number of persons from the tax bracket. Now, when we speak about removing people from the tax bracket, automatically people begin to think, well, you'll be collecting less tax. And if you're speaking about a system with so many challenges, and if you're speaking about the need to collect revenue, then people are understanding it to be, quote unquote, a bad move because you would be earning less. I don't think people really understand the challenge or the cost of collecting or putting in place a necessary system to account for some of the income taxes. What are some of the major challenges with the current system?
Okay. With the current system, we have over 20 allowances and deductions. And the Prime Minister indicated that, and it's the case. That's by far the most. When we have researched Barbados across the region, St. Lucia has the most allowances and deductions. Now, once you have so many allowances and deductions, that complicates the whole system. Okay? It results every year in taxpayers having to go from one institution to the next to source the supporting documents to submit the income tax return.
And guess what? there is now a cost to the taxpayer, because I learned that I now have to pay the bank to give me a statement of my own accounts to submit to the Inland Revenue Department.
That has always been the case.
And depends on the transactions that you want to do. You want to claim because you know, you've had your expenses and so on, but you also have to pay to make that claim. So it's a cost to the taxpayer plus a cost to the Inland Revenue Department to do the verification as well.
Yes, so what you find, taxpayers on the 31st of March, they would come, that's a due date for filing a return. After December 31st, that's the year end for salaried employees and most of our self-employed persons. They would come on the 31st of March with the return form and no supporting documents. So most times we do not, we accept the return because we do not want to impose any late filing penalty. We accept the returns. Some of them would submit the documents before we actually process the return. Sometimes when we are about to process, we do not have the source documents. Then we have to contact the taxpayer. When we do not receive the documents, we have to process that return without the documents. Only to receive, an objection when we process without, because we'd have to disallow the claim if it's not substantiated. Then the objection is lodged and we have to process that. So it's a lot for the taxpayer. It lengthens the processing time. So it's not just a simple return and then you're able to process. You have to go through an objection stage, etc. So it's very taxing even for the taxpayer and the department, the amount of resources we have to expend in order for us to process personal income tax returns. Then we have the 4 bands and 4 tax rates. If you do a survey, most of the countries are moving away from so many tax rates and bans, to the extent that certain countries, they currently have 1 tax rate. Okay? We have Jamaica, we have Grenada. Most of the other countries like Barbados, they have 2 tax rates. So St. Lucia currently has 4 tax rates. So that complicates the computation of the tax payable. So the proposed system will only have 2 tax rates and 2 bands. So it's all about simplification, and not just for the department, but for the taxpayer. And we really want the taxpayers to appreciate that. Any tax system moving in line with international best practices, that tax administration is required to make the system as simple as possible to foster voluntary compliance. And that is the cry across the world. The tax system should be simple to encourage taxpayers to file, because if it is burdensome, taxpayers will not comply, they will not submit a return, they may not submit it on time. So this is what we are aiming for, and it will benefit the taxpayer in the final analysis. Because we also have our e-tax system, and they would register, yes, because they welcome the initiative to be able to transact with the Inland Revenue Department from any remote location. So they will register. But when they find out that they have to upload all of these documents...
That was me earlier this year. I said, okay, it's easy, it's there, let me just go ahead and use it so I do not have to go through taking a line at the Inland Revenue Department and having someone verify. So I said, I'm going to do this thing online. Then I'm realizing that I have to scan and upload my supporting documents. That's and not everyone would have the scanner. Not everyone would, you know, have the competence to do that. And obviously, if you're filing your tax returns, you do not want to submit part of the document without, because it's going to be a longer process for you in the end. And so even though the system is available, I don't have a scanner at my desk, so I just did my thing the normal way and went into the Inland Revenue Department. So I understand what you're saying, that while the service is there and I know it would have come at a cost, people are not inclined to use it because there is this additional layer or this additional barrier, which would be, of course, to upload all of the documents. I'm hoping at least we could get an app where you take a photograph of it, you put it in there, and and everything happens. But for now, you still have to upload and to scan and all of that, which I find it a little bit tedious as well. But where does this put us in terms of the proposers? First, the allowance and the changes in the structure. Is it in line with what is happening around us, or are we doing something that would set us apart from the rest of the region? Say if the region, for example, is this where everyone is going, or are we doing something to make life easier for us in St. Lucia?
Everyone is heading in that direction. As I indicated earlier, Grenada already has one threshold. Okay, Jamaica for a while now has one threshold and one tax rate. I think Grenada has about 2 tax rates, but St. Vincent is the only one in the region, the only country in the region with multiple tax rates and bans. But as we speak, St. Vincent is at the implementation stage, and they are actually embarking upon a major reform. So I would expect in the short run that will change. So all of the countries are heading in that direction. As I indicated earlier, any tax administration, if you want your taxpayers to comply,
yes.
And that's said to us everywhere we go, if you want your taxpayers to comply, your tax system should be very simple. So this is what we are trying to encourage, the voluntary compliance, to make life easier for the taxpayers. By increasing the threshold, there's also an additional objective that will be met. The tax burden right now is more on the low and middle income earners.
Personal allowance, yes.
Yes. And a progressive tax system should not have the low and middle income earners bearing the burden, the tax burden. So that will be shifted slightly. By increasing the threshold, about 2,700 taxpayers will fall below that threshold. Okay? If that's the only source of income, they will not be required to file any return. By reducing the bans, you have a reduction in tax for quite a few taxpayers. Many taxpayers will benefit.
I hope I am one of them.
Many taxpayers will benefit.
I suspect not, but...
January 2016, when this takes effect, many taxpayers will have an increase in their disposable income.
Yes.
And I know they will welcome that. A few taxpayers will be impacted differently. And some of these taxpayers currently do not pay any tax. So we have taxpayers earning $3,000, $4,000, even $6,000 a month, and the tax payable is nil. Now, that should not happen under a progressive tax system. A taxpayer who earns $6,000 pays no tax, as opposed to a taxpayer who earns $3,000. Okay? So the proposed change will deal with such vast differences, and it will make the system a little more progressive. But once you have allowances and deduction, you will not get a fully simplified system and the type of progressivity that you are aiming for. But it will be much better than the current system. But many, and I want to highlight that many taxpayers will benefit come January 2016 with an increase in the disposable income as a result of the proposed changes.
What are some of the allowances that we're looking to knock off? Okay.
I could tell you those that we will not knock off.
Well, yeah, let's deal with that. I think that's an easier way to go, and it will cause some of our viewers to breathe, because many persons have been a little concerned as to what will stay and what will go. And I've gotten a few messages, I think all over the weekend. I was getting some messages about what would be deductible and what would not be deductible. Okay.
There are 4 priority areas. The first, mortgage interest and property tax.
Okay, so you can breathe?
Yes. So taxpayers will continue to claim the mortgage interest and property tax. Currently, the mortgage interest has a cap of $18,000. There will be no cap. A claim can be made up to the maximum of $25,000. So the overall claim will be capped at $25,000. So no taxpayer will be able to make a claim for deductions in excess of $25,000. Okay? The second priority area, we have future benefits. So we want to encourage persons to provide for tomorrow. life insurance, premiums. We have,
accounts.
yes, payments to registered retirement plans, national insurance contribution, and pension contributions. So these currently have caps. There will be no individual caps. You can claim, so a taxpayer is free to claim anyone. So if, for example, at some point in time you no longer have a mortgage, okay, you can claim probably for future benefits up to that maximum of the 25,000. So there's quite a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, there's still room where you can take charge of your finances and do it in such a way that you're able to still have that free space or that breathing space, because I think at the end of the day what we are trying to guard would be our disposable income. I think that's what everybody is trying to ensure, that whatever changes are happening is not going to eat into the disposable income or what is available for them at the end of the month or at the end of the year, however they decide to work it out, so that they are able to meet their needs. There is one issue on the personal income tax that I want to deal with, but we'll go to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll do that, and then you would get an opportunity to send in your questions and also to call to share your views on some of the proposals so far. Stay in touch. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to In Touch. We are discussing proposals to have some changes made to our tax system. We've already discussed the whole issue of VAT and some of the announcements made in the 2015-2016 budget statement by our Prime Minister. And we're currently examining the changes to the personal income tax. Many persons, I think many of the voices that I've heard have embraced that proposal, because we are seeing that our personal allowance would be increased to 25,000, and so it would mean a number of individuals in the lower income bracket who are currently paying income taxes will not be required to pay income taxes, and even those who are paying now, the tax rate would be lower. However, the Comptroller did indicate that we are looking at a progressive tax rate, and so it would mean that there are some individuals, they are in the minority, who would be affected in the other direction, so they would be required to pay more. But this is if you're way up on the scale in terms of income earnings. Let us continue to speak about the deductions. What would be allowed, what would be knocked off. Many persons are concerned because there are some that they consider to be extremely vital. And so let us look at the whole issue of the medical benefits, because I've heard public commentary that there are many individuals who would file for medical benefits because over the year or over an extended period of time they would have been undergoing treatment and so on. How would this system cater to individuals? So how does it provide for our medical expenses?
Okay, a taxpayer will still be able to claim medical insurance premium and also medical expenses. So again, subject to the cap of the 25,000. So in addition to the premium, we will allow for medical claims. Any amount that's not reimbursed by the insurance company, plus other amounts that are incurred, other expenses incurred by the taxpayer. So that, we will not change that. We will allow the claim for medical and also for children and education. There's a child and education benefit. Currently, for a child 10 and under, well, under 10, the claim is $1,000.
Yes.
10 and above, it's $2,000. We will continue to allow the benefits for children and also student loan interest. Under the current system, the student loan can only be claimed by the student, okay? Under the proposed system, whoever is paying the student loan will allow them to make the claim.
Sounds very good.
Yes.
Yes, that sounds very good. On the whole issue of the classification and the tax code, and I knew it would come up because even in our earlier discussion we were speaking about that, and an individual was just indicating that we need to find a way to have a closer match between what an individual is required to pay and what an individual pays. And let me see if I could just get the query, because it seemed to be a query from a personal standpoint. If I could just get this here. He says, what I think needs to happen to make the system easier, while we're focusing on allowances, why not ensure that there is a better match in the system for everyone who makes claims? So at the end of the month, at the end of the year, when I file and the Inland Revenue Department says I owe them $876.10, I have an issue with that, because if I have been filing for a very long time and my circumstances have not changed, then clearly it would mean that when I filed the year before, some advice could have been given on a tax code.
Whenever the taxpayers come to our office to file a return, if there is a liability, we would advise them that they need to change the code. Okay? Because if there's a liability, it means that the tax code is too high. You are not paying enough tax. The higher the tax code, the less tax you pay. Vice versa. The lower the tax code, the more tax you would pay. So once there's a liability, we'd advise and would ask the taxpayers to change the tax code. If there's a liability, they will change the code. Now, when they come to file the return, if there is a refund, just the same, we would advise that they need to change the code, because we do not want you to file a return. Sometimes the refund is as much as $5,000, $6,000. Now, if you have a refund of $6,000, it means that you're paying $500 a month in excess of what you should have paid. So we'll advise them to change the code. And some taxpayers will say to us, they do not want to change the code. They would like us to owe them and pay that lump sum to them at the end of the period.
And then for them to complain that the payments are not being made on time.
That's correct.
To me, it is better to me if I have money in my hand that I can invest, that I can choose to save at a credit union somewhere, that I would be getting dividends for at the end of the period. I always try to understand the logic, because I'm not happy when I file my taxes, and if I decide to purchase some extra in shares, that the Inland Revenue Department has to hold my money for a period of time and pay me when the economy allows, or when they have gone through the entire process of verifying the documents. And it's not just mine, we're talking about thousands of taxpayers that my money has to be tied into the system for a very long period of time. So I'm always wondering, why is it that people prefer to be owed as opposed to having their monies, having control of what they've already worked for? It always baffles me.
Some taxpayers see it as a saving. Some of them would say, that's
with no interest?
That's my money to pay my vehicle insurance. Yes. And they would want us to owe, they would not change the tax code. So these are some of the challenges that we face. Now, we cannot just change the code on our own, because there's a declaration which must be signed for us to change the code. Quite a few of them would agree and sign the declaration and would give them the slip. And we're not sure if that slip would be delivered to the employer. To the extent that this year we decided that we will deliver the slips to the employers to ensure that the code is changed. Because we really want to deal with that situation that we have with so much being owed to the taxpayers. It's not good for the department and our relationship with the taxpayers. We're really trying to work on that refund situation.
And you have so many other areas that you need to look into as a department too, and so many other things that you have to deal with. So I can imagine what it is like for you. Someone is asking, will I have to change my tax code as a result of the increase in personal allowance?
Definitely. Come January 2016, the minimum code will be $25,400, because we will allow the medical of $400.
Okay.
So currently, the minimum code is $18,400. So if someone doesn't come to the department for code, the employer will automatically use the code of 184. So come January 2016, the minimum code is 254. Okay. But if the taxpayer has other items or other claims that need to be made, other amounts that are eligible to be deducted, then the taxpayer would have to come to our department to update the tax code.
Indeed.
But we will embark upon a massive revision of tax codes prior to January 2016.
Okay, and I'm hoping that while we engage in that revision, that there would be some kind of public awareness and engagement so that people can take up that initiative too, to have an interest, to understand what exactly is happening, so that you could know how it would impact you, what some of the changes would be as well. Our telephone number is already up on the screen, 4527347, I'm receiving a lot of questions via WhatsApp and Facebook especially. Those of you who are viewing and want to call in to ask any questions or to make comments, feel free to do so. 452-7347. We have the Comptroller in studio with us, and this is really the best person to answer any questions that you may have on the topic. Good night. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hello, good night.
Hi, good night, Jada. Good night, Madam Controller.
Good night.
I need to ask
I could hardly hear.
Okay.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah, I need to ask a question.
Sure.
Why is it when Inland Revenue owes an employee, they would send a letter to your employer asking them to deduct X amount until all is paid. But when the Inland Revenue owes the employee, owes the employee, it's like squeezing blood out of a rock to get your money from Inland Revenue. They will not pay you. Because I have a situation where they owe me thousands of dollars, and I have made several attempts to get, money back from them, and to no avail. I had to do some house repairs and so on. I took letters into them, and nothing. And it's not like they owe me like $100 or $500, thousands of dollars.
Sure. Thank you so much for your concern and for your question, caller. The process for collecting what is due to your department, is it correct that the employers would become involved to make automatic deductions?
That's a last resort. We would contact the taxpayer. We would actually issue the notice of assessment, give the 30 days for the payment, and if that payment is not made, we sometimes contact the taxpayer to make arrangements, and when all fails, then we would approach the employer for the deduction.
Okay, I was under the impression that when you go to file your taxes at the end of the tax period, if you owe the Inland Revenue Department, that when you bring in your return form, that you would have to attach the amount to it.
Well, yes, it's due upon filing or by the 31st of March, but sometimes if the taxpayer is unable to pay, they would submit the return without the payment. Now, if we owe, if the prior years, there are refunds and we owe the taxpayer, what we'll do, we would encourage them not to settle the amount, and we will do an offset. We prefer to do that because we really want to work and we really want to reduce that backlog that we have. So we really try, and I do admit that we have a backlog, and we have quite a few taxpayers that we owe. We are working diligently to improve the situation. But even as I speak, we have boxes of returned checks in our office. Checks that we mailed, checks that we sent out, and the taxpayers have not collected, and these have been returned to our office. So why some taxpayers are complaining that they are not receiving the refund, the checks are coming back to us. So we are in the process of seeking permission for us to publish the names, because we really want to pay taxpayers. The ideal, and this is my
come in
vision.
to check if my name is on that list.
The ideal is for us to settle refunds no later than December of the year that the return is filed. And we are hoping with some of these changes, we will achieve that.
Right.
That is the goal.
How far are we in terms of the backlog? How many years?
A few years.
A few?
Yes. Yes.
I would imagine.
But currently we are working with a few employers, and we will extend that. We'll roll that over. What we are doing, we're trying to offset current taxes against whatever we owe. So we have identified certain employees that we owe for a few years, and they will not be required to pay any taxes until that is cleared up. So we started up that pilot project, and it's working very well. It's well received by the employers and employees. So we are going to extend that because we really want to reduce on that backlog. We really want to be up to date, with the payment of these refunds.
Yeah, I'm getting a question here that says, are credit union savings still an allowable deduction?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I'm hoping the individual can get the response to that. You can call in at 452-7347 if you have any questions to ask or comments that you would like to make. I tell you, the proposal that individuals who currently have outstanding amounts owed to them by the Inland Revenue Department to offset that against current, that they would not be required to pay taxes, sounds like a very good proposal to me. Good night, you on the air?
Good evening.
Hi, good
Miss
evening.
Sophia.
Hello.
And good evening to your guests.
Good evening.
I am really impressed as I listen to you with your wealth of knowledge as you articulated so much about the tax and VAT, and you did it really clearly.
Thank
And
you.
you know, so you just articulated it, and it was really a learning experience for me. But what I want to do tonight is to just look at the fiscal environment that we are in right now. And I would really like to applaud Dr. Kenny Anthony for studying the fiscal environment, for the courage and skill in taking tough decisions so that we as a nation cannot end up in the jaws of the IMF. Because when you look at the service, I don't think we have ever had a month where civil servants have not gotten a salary. We look at the infrastructural development from every end of the country. We look at developments, and we look at a prime minister in these challenging times being able to reach into every household and by giving, and also by taking, by giving. And you know, when you are on choppy waters, you need a pilot. You need somebody who's able to steer the course and lead you. And you know, once again, I just want to commend the Prime Minister. We are the environment is challenging, but for the decisions that he's taken, I am certain that under his governance, we will not end up in the jaws of the IMF. Thank you very much, ladies.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution. We have another call on 9. Good night, you on there.
Hi, good night, Mrs. Emmanuel. Good night to your guests.
Good night.
I have been following your discussion, and I, like the other caller, I really would like to thank you for explaining this so much to detail. I am really interested in the personal allowance and so on. I am happy that it is really across the board, and that a lot more persons can benefit from that cut. We have a situation, and I know that a lot of persons and so on might not really understand what it means for a 25. You can claim up to $25,000 your personal allowances.
Yeah.
I want to ask, because some persons, a conversation I was having earlier, does that include, if you're filing and so on, does that include your supporting documents and so on, items that your bills from groceries and utilities and that sort of thing, apart from what you mentioned of insurance and that sort of thing? Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks. I think what she's asking is that whether that $25,000 personal allowance includes the other deductions that we spoke about a little while ago, and the answer is no, because it is a personal allowance for every single individual across the board, whether you have medical insurance claims, whether irrespective of, it is an additional, it is a first basically, and then you can claim your additional allowances, if I understood what you explained.
The $25,000, that you don't need any supporting documents for that first $25,000.
Right.
Okay? That means that the first $25,000 of your salary is not going to be subject to any tax. It is below the threshold. That's what it means basically. Okay. So no supporting document is required for that. And the additional one, which will be capped, this is the $25,000 you would have to provide any supporting documents or any part thereof. So if you're making a claim in addition to the basic $25,000 for $8,000, and it is for life insurance, then we need supporting documents. But we'll try to even simplify the system further, because we have already contacted the insurance companies to see to what extent we can obtain the information from them, so that the taxpayers will not have to go sourcing that. So we will further simplify the system.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful idea. Good night, you on the air? Hello, good night. You can continue to call in at 4527347. I think at the end of that period, it is always a burden, because you have to leave wherever you are, whatever you're doing at the time, to ensure that you meet that deadline And you see, the thing is, sometimes you have to deal with 3 financial institutions, 2 insurance companies, and so on. And you have to request from each of these institutions your documents. Now, they know that the period is coming, and they know that every year it is a process. However, you must request it, because this is the policy. The bank will not automatically prepare a statement for you for tax purposes unless you request it. Your insurance company will not automatically prepare a statement. So it is also a burden for the taxpayer as well, because you must go in for these documents. And I think it would be such a beautiful idea if the Inland Revenue Department, if there is a system where you can simply grant authorization, because there may be people who still would not be comfortable with it that way, but you could just grant authorization that that information be passed on to the department to make it simpler
Yes.
and easier.
We have already contacted the insurance company and we're working towards that.
I think that is extremely, extremely important. We'll try to get in as many calls as possible. Good night to you on the air.
Yeah, I have 2 issues.
Sure.
One has to do with the fact that higher income persons would in effect pay more tax. But we have to bear in mind that these are the persons who employ, say, the gardeners or the helpers.
So I heard from Mr. Peter Kane. He said so on HTS a few nights ago, yes. I heard that argument.
So in a situation where the person's disposable income has been reduced, what do you expect them to do in terms of employment? Isn't that going to have an impact on the unemployment situation when they have to dismiss people because the disposable income has gone down?
But if I can ask you, in the situation where the disposable income of other individuals would increase as a result of that very same measure, what do you expect to happen? Are you there, Paula?
I would hope that they can pick up on the unemployment situation, and so hopefully we will see a marked improvement from 25%, hopefully in the next period.
I think we are all hopeful. Your second issue?
The second issue I have has to do with the fact that the limit on medicals has been incorporated in this $25,000, when in fact most people have to obtain medical coverage way in excess of that. I would like to get an indication as to the rationale why there was a limit placed on the medical deduction.
Sure, thank you so much for that.
Medical coverage way in excess of the 25,000. We looked at all of the claims, and a handful, just a few persons have excessive medical claims. Most of the taxpayers, the claim would range from 2,000, 3,000, probably the insurance premium, and a few receipts submitted, a few additional amounts. So it's not many people, many taxpayers who make a claim in excess of that 25,000. So the coverage the taxpayer is referring to, if you get medical insurance coverage of 50,000, that 50,000 is not allowable, okay? It is the premium and whatever you utilize that's allowable. So it doesn't impact your medical coverage, because what I understand coverage is what you're entitled to claim in terms of medical from an insurance company. So that's not impacted. But the actual claim for any given year is what you could claim for tax purposes. And in most cases, it's not significant. Just a few, as I indicated earlier, would make a claim in excess of the 25,000. And I need to point out also, there is a cap, but the taxpayers must realize that the tax rates have been reduced also, and the tax bans. So that sort of compensates for the cap or some of the amounts that will not be claimed, okay? So it makes a difference. So even someone who is unable to claim a portion of the allowances and deductions now, that person doesn't automatically pay more tax by virtue of the fact that the tax rates have gone down also, okay? The current tax rate goes up as high as 30%.
Yes.
Under the proposed system, the highest tax rate is 25%. So that compensates for the loss of some of the deductions. And the tax, yes, so you need to understand that. And as I indicated previously, certain taxpayers who pay nothing will be contributing now. So in that, the percentage that will pay more or will be adversely impacted, we have quite a few, they don't contribute. So it's not only the taxpayers who are currently making a contribution would have to pay more. In some cases, not very significant.
I wanted to touch on an issue, but we'll take our final call and then we'll get to that. Good night, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
I'm just calling to find out from Mrs. Henry whether travel allowance is now taxable.
Sure, thank you for that call.
Okay, travel allowance, it is taxable, and I guess that what the caller would like to find out if you'd be able to get the $6,000 deduction. That will still continue, so that is not impacted by the $25,000 limit.
Okay, indeed. I wanted to ask this question. We have to wrap up just about now because we have just about 4 more minutes left, so we cannot take any more calls. But this is based on a comment made by one of our callers to say that when you say that you're going to be capping at 25,000, what about those individuals who have beyond? How did we get here? I would hope that there was a process in the Inland Revenue Department and with the other players where you examine what currently exists, not simply what exists around us, but that there was a comprehensive review of our current tax system, and that the proposals that we are now making would be based on data, based on information, not based on guesses or based on what we want the desired outcome to be. How did we get to the point of these proposals to be so confident that this is the way to go at this time?
Okay. It was a comprehensive analysis. We engaged a few tax consultants. We had meetings. We discussed. We looked at various scenarios because ultimately we wanted everybody to benefit, everybody to pay less. But it would cost the government over $20 million for us to arrive at a point where everybody would benefit, and that was the ideal, but it would cost too much. So we had to strike a balance between revenue loss and also the number of taxpayers would be made worse off. So we tried to keep that number very low. We wanted very few taxpayers to be worse off. And this was the ideal. This was the only scenario, the only mix that brought us close to our objective. The ultimate would have been one threshold, one tax rate. And at the end, for us to eliminate the need to have returns submitted at the end of the period. That's what we were aiming for. But at this point, because of the multiple allowances and deductions, the system is so badly skewed that it's just not possible to arrive at that ultimate goal, to have that one threshold, probably one tax rate, and to eliminate the filing of returns.
You spoke about revenue losses, so we are anticipating that once this proposal goes into effect, that there would be revenue loss for the government of St. Lucia from the PAYE?
Okay. There's an estimated reduction in personal income tax as a result. Because remember, I indicated quite a few persons, the disposable income will increase. So there's a revenue loss with respect to personal income tax of that 8-point-something million. But remember, that money will be spent, so it will be right there circulating the economy. Those persons will purchase items, because remember, the Prime Minister also wants to shift away from the direct into the indirect system of taxation. Okay, so we expect to recover some from VAT. Also, the system, it will be more simple. With the simplification, it means that we could redeploy some of our resources in the department. Currently, we have so many officers dealing with clerical duties as a result of all of these allowances and deductions to process these returns. So we expect to benefit from some efficiency gains, and we will be able to realize some returns in some other tax type or in some other area. So we expect for that revenue loss in personal income tax to be offset as a result of the efficiency gains.
And finally, when do we expect the changes to take effect? And this is a question that about 59 persons asked me tonight. These changes that we are speaking about, are they already in effect? Would they be in effect by the end of this income year? When do they take effect?
No. The personal income tax, the changes to the personal income tax system will take effect from January 2016. And the first return would be filed in 2017. So as soon as it takes legal effect, we will start working with the taxpayers. We'll start our taxpayer education. The VAT proposals may take effect sooner, probably later this year. But none of these have taken effect. They're still proposals.
Okay. And especially for the VAT, we know that they would have to go to the House of Assembly to have the changes made to the Act and to go through the whole process of the debates and so on and so forth. I want to thank you so much for being on the program tonight. I learned a lot, and based on the questions that I'm getting and even from our callers as well, we know that there was a very high interest in these proposals. Once you're talking taxes, it doesn't matter what you say before or after. Once that word is in there, it will capture the attention of a number of persons. Even though I'm smiling here, I am really not happy when I get my salary slip at the end of the month and I see how much I have to pay in taxes. And I am sure, in fact, our Prime Minister has said it, nobody likes to pay taxes, but we just understand that it is a necessary evil, if I can call it that way. You must pay the taxes if you want your country to prosper, if you want to ensure that you have a system that caters to your neighbors and caters to your community and caters even to the future. There has to be a system through which the government can collect revenue. And I'm sure this would be your view as well, whereas you are not.
But JJ, I would like to let you know that I will be paying more tax under the proposed system.
And you're smiling so much? I don't think by the tenderness in your voice and the smile on your face for tonight, I don't think the viewers would be guessing that at all.
Yes, yes.
at all. But thank you so much for joining us on another edition of In Touch. It is always a pleasure to be with you, and always a pleasure to get you guests who would be able to speak to you from a very informed position on what is happening in the country, some of our proposals. No doubt the discussion will continue on the social media and elsewhere. You can always call in to the Inland Revenue Department to share your ideas, to ask your questions. We have always said, and just as we heard from the Comptroller, no one individual or no one department would have all the answers. They are always willing to listen. And so whether it is on the value-added tax, the PAYE, the property tax, whatever other tax regime, feel free to call in to ask your questions and to make your suggestions, because they are listening. I want to thank our technical directors. I want to thank the management of Choice TV for the opportunity to always speak to you. Thank you for viewing, and thank you for calling into the program tonight. Good night, and enjoy the rest of your week.